Growing beans, dwarf bush or climbing. Each type of growth habit has its own advantages and disadvantages. Having grown both for a number of years, my own preference is for the climbing varieties. My objective is to produce a crop of dry beans shelled out from the pods and use over winter as food. Here's why they suit my circumstances. I have used the following criteria: harvest quantity, harvest period, harvest quality, harvest ease, harvest technology, biomass production, mechanical support, sowing demands on labor, threshing, pod shattering or dehiscence, contaminated product, bird damage, inter-row monitoring. Harvest quantity. Climbers produce more dry beans on a unit area. In 2022, I grew climbers only, with a result of 1.4 ounces of dry beans per square foot. In the previous year, bush borlotti produced 0.6 ounces of dry beans per square foot. So for a given area of garden, the climbers were over twice as productive. Harvest period. Once they start producing pods, climbers produce over a longer period of time. This is useful if the objective is continuous fresh beans. Harvest quality. Climbers I have grown produce a more even quality of soft, dry bean. The dwarf varieties I have tried, for example borlotti, tend to be more floury, but this could just be a matter of variety selection. Harvest ease. Since most of the pods are well off the ground, pods on climbers are easy to collect without much stooping. The growing period for bush beans is shorter than for climbers, which allows for harvesting at a time of year when the weather is still relatively dry and warm, which eases threshing but decreases yield since opportunities for photosynthesis are fewer. Harvest technology. Where beans need to be harvested by machine, dwarf varieties are clearly the way to go. In my case, I harvest by hand. Some of the pods on climbers can be too high to reach from the ground, but they are easily collected when the poles are removed. Most of these high pods are still green when harvested, and so need to be treated separately from the fully mature and dry pods anyway. Biomass production. We might seek a large biomass for composting at the end of the season, but in my experience, since climbers are sown thinly and bush beans more densely, even though a single climber produces more vine material than a bush plant, the overall production of dry matter is about the same for a given garden area. Mechanical support. Bush beans must stand by themselves while heavily laden with full pods against buffeting winds. If they are not planted deeply enough, they tend to topple, leading to excessive wetting of mature pods close to the soil surface. Close attention to row spacing can help keep them upright, but the more closely they are planted, the more difficult it is to move among the rows for roguing, weeding, harvesting, and other operations. Climbers, on the other hand, have a special support that relieves them of any need to support themselves. Fortunately, in my case, I have my own supplies of rot-resistant stakes for poles and foundation support. This can be erected early in the season when there is time available. Sowing demands on labour. While we can plant 2 rows of bush beans in the same space that supports 1 row of climbing beans, climbers still win out. Since the seed of bush beans needs to be planted fairly deeply, this requires either a very loose tilth or the required energy and time expended opening a deep furrow to receive the seed. The extra depth required can lead to gaps in the row due to failed germination, which is a significant disadvantage since we need close, consistent emergence for support. This requirement is eliminated with climbers where we can focus on a planting depth according to soil moisture conditions. Threshing. Bush beans require me to harvest the plants whole and hang up to dry before threshing can begin. Late in the season we tend to have rains which keep the bush bean pods moist because the pods are proximally associated, bunched up together closely, especially if you don't have a nice large barn to hang them in. Climbers keep the pods much more separated in the field. Rain can wet the exterior of the pods, but even after several days of rain, the pods quickly dry out again. This means that harvesting can be delayed until ideal dry conditions occur when most of the crop has matured. Pod shattering or dehiscence. Bush beans inevitably seem to create problems at harvest time when the plants are bearing both pods that are fully mature and dry and late young pods still filling out. It's a toss-up whether to harvest today or tomorrow or the following week. A portion of the crop will be lost and cast on the ground during the pulling process to the benefit of gleaners. Climbers do not seem to have this issue, so waste is very small. Contaminated product. Where bush beans are harvested by pulling the entire plant, there is a risk that soil and larger contaminants will be carried into the product destined for threshing. The last thing we need is for small stones the size of peas to make it through to the final product stage. This possibility is almost eliminated when harvesting climbers, since there is no risk of soil contamination except for pods that are extremely low on the vine. Bird damage. Damage due to birds is greater in climbers since birds enjoy the support structures as playgrounds, and since the pod clusters are spread further apart, they have easier access. The damage is minimal, so this does not figure for me as a major disadvantage. Inter-row monitoring. From time to time, I have problems in my garden with visiting groundhogs. They seem to appreciate closely planted dwarf bean fields, randomly planted asparagus beds, and hugelkultur experiments where they can build burrows quietly and effectively where the foliage or mounded earth offers concealment. The spaced rows of climbing beans, where much of the foliage is high off the ground, allows easy visual inspection for disturbed ground, indicating a burrow entrance. In these days of more and more expensive food, finding a space to set up a garden of climbing beans to produce many pounds of beans can help feed a household, reduce the demand for food bank supplies, and provide entertainment, education, and a feeling of accomplishment for the entire family.